Good morning. We're going to talk about Chapter 22 today, which is Evaluating Variances from Standard Cost. This is one of those hard chapters, and I have an additional handout, one sheet that I've made for variances that you'll be able to access on the website. So we talk about standards. Standards are nothing more than gold. In manufacturing, you have to set a standard. You have to have a standard cost for materials, for labor, and for factory overhead. So this is what you set as a milestone or a checkpoint, something you're going to come back to check to make sure these are actually met. Standard cost system, we really just want to know is how much should a product cost, and how much does it actually cost. So we're going to set the standards. Our standards are usually set by budgeting. And what we're going to do in this chapter is after we've set a standard cost, we're going to go back and find out how much did it actually cost, and we're going to compare the two. And that's what this chapter is all about. Be careful when you're setting standards. You do not want to set what we call ideal standards. These are what would happen under perfect conditions, because we know that is not really going to happen. So always make sure that your standards are not ideal standards. Instead, you would rather have them obtainable standards, things that will allow for some variances or some problems to happen along the way. If you set an attainable standard, then employees are much more focused on cost and will do what they can to make sure those happen, because they're usually rewarded in some way when they meet the standards. Standards costs are not set in stone. You can review them periodically, because in reality, standards that are set for cost actually need to be reviewed, because you have material pricing that goes up, you have labor costs that go up. So there's a lot of reasons why you might actually review and revise your standard cost along the way. So to start with, first of all, we have to have a budget set in place, which was Chapter 21. And we're going to be called Western Rider. We're going to be a manufacturer of blue jeans, and we're going to use standard cost. So I've got standards set for my direct materials, my direct labor. Oh, let me get my little pointer. My direct materials, my direct labor, and my factory overhead. And they're broken into two components: standard price and standard quantity. SP and SQ, because these are going to be initials. On my handout sheet, I have acronyms. So here, the standard cost per unit for each of these is the standard price times the standard quantity. This is just the standard cost per unit. So no need to write this down. You can come back and take a look at this. So here we have, for direct materials, my materials cost $5 per square yard. And my standard quantity of material for each pair is 1.5 square yards. So I can expect my standard cost to be $7.50 just for direct material. Direct labor, my standard price, which is my standard labor rate, is $9 per hour, and the quantity is 0.80 of an hour per pair. So it takes almost an hour of labor to make a pair of jeans. When I multiply that, I'm going to get $7.20. My factory overhead is a rate. It's $6 per hour, because if you remember, when we were learning predetermined factory overheads, we were basing it up on direct labor rates. So it's going to be $6 per hour, and it's going to be basically 0.80 hour per pair of jeans. So the standard cost for a pair of jeans is $19.50. So these were based up in the budget. These were the things we actually budgeted for. So those are my standard. My standard is my budgeted. And what's going to happen is when we get ready, we're going to go back and we're going to look at what we call a cost variance. A cost variance is going to happen when I compare the budget to what actually happened. So a favorable cost variance is when the actual cost is less than the standard cost. In other words, I didn't spend as much money as I thought I would spend. So it's a favorable because it's in my favor. And it will be signified by just the letter F. An unfavorable cost happens when my actual cost exceeds the standard cost. Sort of like this. So here's favorable, here's unfavorable. And for purposes of homework, you're going to have just the letter F or just the letter U to signify what your answer is going to be. And keep in mind that these always have to be noted, that your answer has to be said, is it favorable or is it unfavorable? But as we go along, I'm going to show you how to know automatically which one it's going to be. We're going to have an actual report called a budget performance report, and all this is comparing actual to what I budgeted. Again, chapter 21 was the budget. So here's my information. I produced 5,000 pairs of jeans, and these are my actual costs right here. Not my budgeted, but what I actually incurred. So when I look at this budget report here, I'm going to see my actual cost. These are my standard costs for 5,000 pairs of jeans. So these would have been the numbers that we just had calculated over here. So you can see that we're going to do two things. We're going to go across and compare, and then we're going to go down and add. So you're going to add up all your standard costs, but the key is you're going to go across. So for materials, my actual cost was higher than my standard cost. So in actuality, this $2,650 would really be unfavorable because the cost of materials was higher than what I anticipated. My labor was $38,500. My standard was $36,000. So notice this would be unfavorable. Notice these are both positive numbers. Positive numbers mean unfavorable. But when I get to factory overhead, my factory overhead was less than what I anticipated. So when I subtract across, I'm negative 1,600. That is a favorable number. So any negatives will be favorable, any positives will be unfavorable. Now, after I've done across this way, I'm going to go down. So I had positive, positive, negative. When I add them up, I'm going to be at $3,550 unfavorable because it is a positive number. So remember this, if nothing else, unfavorable is negative, favorable is positive. So the total manufacturing cost variance is broken into standard cost and actual cost. And so I have some formulas that you can write down on the next few slides. But I also have the same information on a handout. So when we're talking about direct materials, it's the difference between the actual materials, direct materials cost and the standard. It's the difference. It means you're subtracting these two numbers, which will give me the direct materials cost variance. So I'm going to look at the actual price times the actual quantity. That's what I actually did. Minus the standard price times the standard quantity, which will basically be the difference in the price and the difference in the quantity. So I'm going to have two variances. I'm going to have a price difference variance and I'm going to have a quantity difference variance for manufacturing, just for direct materials. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Okay, let's go to direct labor. Same concept. I'm going to have it's the difference between the actual cost and the standard cost. But the actual and standard are broken down to the actual rate and the actual time. So this is the hourly rate and the time it takes to make it. This is also called time. It's also called efficiency sometimes. So it's going to be the rate, the direct labor rate variance will be the rate difference plus the time difference. So I'm going to have two separate ones that notice I'm adding together. But here I'm subtracting, but when I get the final answers, I'll add them together. Now finally we have manufacturing factory overhead cost. Okay? So that is this is a little bit more complicated and we're going to talk about this. Because I've got fixed and variable that I have to have costs for each one. Now I'm going to show you the next slide, which is going to be, I believe, the final slide in this video. And it's a little bit confusing, but again, I do have a template handout. So my direct material cost variance will be the direct materials price variance plus the direct materials quantity. So I'm adding these two numbers to get this. My labor, I'll be adding these two numbers to get this, and my factory overhead will have a fixed and a fixed and a variable. So notice the word down here, fixed, says volume. So whenever you hear the word volume on factory overhead, it's talking about fixed. Variable is controllable. So whenever you hear that, it's variable. So this is just kind of an overview of the variances that we're going to compare. I'll continue in the next video.